This is the Life as a Therapist podcast, a peek behind the screen at the real stories of real therapists. My name is Kimberly Valdez. I'm here today with JP Kendrick, and today's topic is recovery as a therapist. JP, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
It's good to be here with you today, first of all.
I know, we're pretending like we don't know each other, but we have known each other for 5 years now?
I think it has been, yeah. You were my professor first at Baylor when I was doing my graduate school program, and then later became my clinical supervisor, where I finished up my hours, and now we work together.
Yeah, you've just been stuck with me.
It could go the other way around, too. You also have been stuck with me.
Well, it's fair. I'm happy to be stuck with you.
Likewise.
Okay. Yeah. So tell everyone a little bit about the work that we do together.
Well, as part of a group practice, we've got 7 clinicians that each bring something different as far as specialty, and some of us have the same specialties, but all of us have, I think, an independent and distinct niche that we all fill. My work usually centers around trauma and addiction, and that is not what I chose for myself. I am a person in recovery, and when I first set out and was trying to kind of determine for myself what this was going to be for me and how I wanted to help and who I wanted to help, I had it in my mind really staunchly that I didn't want anything to do with treating addiction because I'm in recovery, and recovery is a lifestyle. It's an ongoing thing, and it takes up a lot of space sometimes.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking is that in the name of balance, it might be too much. And I was wrong. Yeah. It just sort of organically happened that way, that people found their way into my caseload, and I really enjoyed the work much more than I thought that I would. I thought I would feel covered up by it from the beginning. But practicing in this setting, in the private practice setting and treating addiction, I like much better than the settings where I've treated it formally before.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting that is something that happens to a lot of us as therapists, that we have an idea of what we're going to do going in. And it's, for me, it was, I'm going to be a child therapist, and I'm going to do all play therapy, and it's going to be so wonderful, and I'm going to love it. And then you get into the work, and you get exposed to a different variety of clients. And then your niche sometimes finds you based on what your own life experiences are. Yep. So I know I've had a lot of moms, people in the queer community, and neurodivergent people find me on my caseload. And because I have a lot of those life experiences, it makes the work that we do better.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, it speaks directly to how I like to practice. Everybody has their own style, their own gifts that they bring in, and they have their own. There's the methodology and the theories and all of the tools that we all use, all the academia, the tools and tricks of the trade. But research tells us most of what compels people in recovery, whatever it is that from which they wish to recover, whether it's substances or themselves or their stories. In the therapeutic setting, most of what compels their healing is in the quality of the rapport.
Yeah.
It's not the expertise. It's certainly necessary. That's why we all have to have it and get those boxes checked and learn those things and stay really sharp on them. But there's something about people. I think to me, this is the other part of the world that, for me, exists, even though I don't necessarily understand it. But it's the unseen, the unheard, and the way things work, and the way people tend to gravitate to each other in meaningful ways when it really matters. And I think that, for me, that speaks to how sometimes our specialties and niches can choose us.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about this all the time. The more genuine and authentic we are, the better that breeds connection. And we know connection and compassion breed healing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get back to you. So how did you become a therapist in the first place? Because I know that this is a second career for you. Third career.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got, I like to say, borrowing from, I don't remember which silly movie it was from the 90s, but collection of hairnets and name tags from my various wanderings through the professional world. I started off, my first career choice was as a musician. I started when I was 22-ish, playing professionally, and have been playing professionally ever since. I also, prior to becoming a therapist, worked as a recruiter, and in a bunch of different settings, doing a lot of business development and headhunting.
Yeah.
How did you didn't ask me, but it feels important to say, how is it that I came to be here?
Yeah. How did you go from
that.
musician to corporate recruiter to therapist?
Well, I mean, those are identities and chapters of my story, but the main story is my story. It's not my professional story. It's my human one.
Yeah.
And it's one of a lot of healing. And a lot of us come from hard places. I came from hard places. And I was really lost when I emerged into the world. I was 18, and I had no clue. I had no idea how to live or manage myself, let alone understand myself, my place in the world, my relationship to other people in the world. Yeah. And, it led me in dark places. That's in the most meta way, really kind of the pathway for addiction for me, for substances. I'm an alcoholic to this day. I'm a sober one, but I'm an alcoholic to this day. And that alcohol was it was the only thing that I knew how to use to cope. It was a survival style.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that medicine, although it does work in a lot of ways, side effects, it goes a lot farther beyond like swollen fingers and dry mouth. There's some real consequences to that lifestyle. And a lot of us have this sort of swath of scorched earth behind us. Yeah. And I think being part of a 12-step recovery community for a very long time, it's really natural for a lot of people in recovery to find their way into healing work and helping work. In 12-step recovery, there's a core piece of that has to do with helping others. Yeah. And then it speaks to an archetype, too. Some of us have that bone, and it turns out I have it and didn't really realize it.
It speaks to an archetype. Tell me more about that.
The helper.
Okay.
Yeah, the helper. The people who, I think it starts with empathy and how you experience your own empathy regarding other people and what it compels you to do. And we're all attuned to that differently. Yeah. This is, and you think about first responders and people who are naturally wired to run in when everybody else is fleeing. It's an archetype there. There's something specific about that person, and I think it was a calling. It's also a fascination. Working around people who are actively recovering and getting to know them long enough, and you, gives you a really intimate purview into their lives and into them and their stories. So being a part of a 12-step community, I became aware of the capacity for people to recover, to be better if they have what they need to do it. A lot of people believe that they are screwed. Yeah. They're stuck, and that is just simply the short straw that they drew. And I don't believe that. I lived most of my life before I was meaningfully recovered in that belief system. I knew I was an alcoholic. I did not have to be convinced of that. I did not find out when I went to treatment.
Yeah. You were already really self-aware.
Oh, absolutely. And I believed that that's what I was intended to be. Yeah. I believed that, simply put, I was bad people. And there have to exist bad people in order to compare and contrast and define the good ones. I'm a necessary thing. I'm the back side of the sheet of paper, without which the front cannot exist.
Yeah, so this was your lot in life.
That's it. Doctor, lawyer, alcoholic, right? And so let's get on with it.
Yeah. When do you think you first started to realize that? Like obviously it didn't happen when you went into treatment, but when did you notice that belief shaping, that you were meant to be the bad guy?
Oh, I mean, that goes back to childhood, really.
Okay.
Yeah. My family system wasn't really adequately geared to instill me with other beliefs.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I left the nest a bad object. Okay. And carried that
So when
belief.
you were that lost 18-year-old going out into the world, that belief was already fully formed.
Yeah.
And then the decisions that you made from there were based on that belief that there are good people and bad people, and I'm one of the bad ones, so just let's move on with it.
And life reflects you back to yourself. Yeah. The problem with that, and speaks to really the core issue of addiction, like we more and more understand it to be a disease of isolation. Yeah. When somebody is reflected back to themselves often enough in a way that they find reprehensible, they stop looking in that mirror. That means they cut themselves off from other people. So it's desperately lonely too. Yeah.
So when did you start to realize that might not actually be true?
For me?
Yeah, for you.
It was the 12-step community that's really solely responsible for that. I went into residential treatment, which was a really, really imperative container for me. I was not somebody that was going to be able to make a decision and then grind it out and go to some meetings. I needed the container and the detox and all the stuff that goes with it, and a lot of information too. Like the psychoeducation and treatment was really important for me. It gave me a little bit of space inside to go, oh, they actually know what this is. This isn't a book. Like
it's not just you in the ways that you're broken. This is something that other people experience in the same way. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of those other people are even good people. Well,
convincing yourself after a lifetime to that point, which was about 34 for me. I was 34 when I got recovered. And so changing that belief system, it was human connection. In the 12-step community that I was introduced to through residential treatment, I could see those people, and I believed them when they told me that they used to think that I did, like I did, and I could see that they were sober. I did not believe that I was able to be helped. I thought it was too destined, if you will. It was too set in stone, even after I started. But I hung my hat on their belief that it could help me. And that was enough. But it was people that gave me the thing to hold my hat on, to hang my hat on. They just showed up and hung around me and genuinely let me know that they believe I could. Yeah. That was really strange to me too. I didn't trust them at first.
Well, it's hard to trust someone who is acting so counter to what all of your experiences have been.
Oh, it feels outright threatening, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Feels threatening. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, I mean, it's counter to everything that you know. It challenges your reality. Skewed is, in hindsight, of course, my perspective was a little askew, but but when it's your perspective, that's reality. And then these, happy, irritatingly, annoyingly, joyous, free people come, flitting around telling you that the world is not what you believe it to be. And I don't trust that. I didn't trust that.
How long did it take you to begin to trust that?
It's a good question. A little hazy. The first year or so.
Fair. Very fair.
It was, I would say, some months in to actually engaging in the process of recovery that I found in the 12-step community. That process itself is so strange to people who don't understand it. They know it exists, but there's such a stigma around it too. It really is transformative. I have long held the belief that anybody who could, meaning they felt compelled to, first of all, and were willing to, second of all, go through that process the right way, could benefit. Yeah. It can be transformative for many people, even if they're not in substance use addiction. And what I mean by if they can, and doing it the right way, is it really is simple by content. But it's a pretty radical process. And the reason why people do it is because they're desperate enough to do it. Yeah. Without that desperation, it just is kind of doesn't make a lot of sense for people to, do that kind of work. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about what I know about recovery, and my experience is more limited. Addiction and recovery are not my area of specialty, and that's part of why I'm really happy to have you in our practice, because you are our expert. But I think about this notion of being stripped bare, and starting over and learning who you are and your belief systems and how to function in the world. And I think about how terrifying that feels when you are looking at this long road, and how many people stop before they enter the process because that road looks impossible.
There's a lot of bodies piled up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you believe something's impossible, why would you? Well, I mean, I can think back to my days pre-recovery, considering things that were impossible, and even the smallest things. Like you hold these really deeply entrenched. We call them cognitive errors.
Okay.
But man, I mean, it goes down to core beliefs about anything that comes up. Here's a for instance. It's funny now, right? I drove a minivan at the end of my drinking.
Okay.
And I had worked in the oil field out in West Texas for a brief while in my minivan.
I'm just imagining you, 34-year-old JP, just tooting around like Midland, Texas in your minivan.
In the oil field.
And an oil field. I can't even fully form that picture in my head, but I love it.
Yeah.
You need a cowboy hat on, and like the Eagles in a tape on the radio deck.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. I see what you're spinning up here. So I broke my minivan in the oil field, as you might expect, and for the next year plus, put 5 quarts of oil in said minivan every time I drove it. I had a case of oil in the car. It leaked that much oil. It was covered in oil from all of the air that moves as you drive. The entire back was covered in oil. And I knew that the problem was catastrophic. And I would never, because I was a loser alcoholic, be able to afford to fix it. Okay. So I'll just keep dumping oil in it until it dies. And turns out,
afford to fix it. I'm thinking 5 quarts of oil every time you drive it.
How
much money was that costing you?
You know what the problem was?
What?
The oil filter was cracked. That's about a $10 part. And it's simple to fix by yourself with just a little wrench.
Yeah.
I'm fully capable of that. But the belief was so deeply entrenched. And this is the kind of, this is the mind of a person in active addiction. Everything steers you away from recovery. Everything steers you away from a belief that would lead you away from drinking or having to drink. Yeah. It's such an insidious problem. It really is. And it's comical. I mean, it's a $5 oil filter, right? Yeah. But man, when you think about when the problem is really meaningful and you still have that kind of a deeply foundational belief about yourself and your ability to tackle it or what's going to happen, like yeah. It's not uncommon for you to become, you to sort of make it happen. Yeah. A self-fulfilling prophecy. The problems being of your own making kind of a piece. I think that's largely where that stems from. And that's something that, that's language that you hear often when it comes to sort of the great epiphanies of recovery that we are granted when we get in there and do the work is, shit, man, it's really me. It's not the world. Yeah. Damn it.
So I want to know what that's like for you on both sides. Because I'm thinking about this dumb thing people say, where they haven't had those experiences and they're saying, well, just stop drinking. Yeah. And it's, well, just change the oil filter.
Yeah.
And it's so overly simplistic to something that is a much more complex issue.
You hear people in recovery refer to addiction as cunning, baffling, and powerful. They almost personify it. They do personify it often. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of relating to it. Because, look, it's in there and it doesn't go away. Yeah. It stays with you until you die. I, sitting across this desk from you, am an alcoholic. I'm a sober one. I want to die. I'm going to die an alcoholic. Yeah. Right? I want to die a sober one. I lost my thought for a second. Tell me do you remember what you just asked me?
Oh, I want to know what it's like, to both as someone in recovery and as a therapist, to have people see the reality of something being both so simple and complex.
Yeah. There is a truth about recovery that is really difficult for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And the concept is that of paradox, a dilemma. Mm-hmm. For instance, I find out when I go to treatment that I have an actual illness, and insurance even recognizes that it's an illness. And there's like tons of research about me, right? In my experience, like, that's me. That's my experience. That's my dad, too. That explains a lot about my dad that has always just been confusing, and about myself. And, well, now I have a disease, right? There is a mixed bag of experience there. Some of it is kind of that, great. Mm-hmm. For me, it wasn't awful because I already knew, right? There's also a space that gets created, because it makes me less reprehensible. It's not a thing that I am. It's a thing that I have. Yeah. And it's not an instant moment where I have that information and all of a sudden the switch flips and I give myself a break. In time, that can settle in and you see the reality of it. That's why it's important. We go back to the idea of the mirror, of our worlds around us being mirrors and reflecting us back to ourselves. Yeah. When you change the mirror, you'll be reflected back to yourself differently. It goes back to the idea of those people that had to believe for me that I could recover. Yeah. And I let them. But those people were the new mirror. Right? When you're isolated, your mirrors are few and far between. People often are living multiple lives, mm-hmm. showing up very differently to each each one trying anything they can to fit in somewhere because of the visceral need to be connected to other humans that we all have. We're a herd species, we're a communal species. We're not designed to be isolated. That's part of what destroys people in addiction.
So what do you start to see in this new mirror being reflected back to you by the other people in your recovery program?
Oh, what did I start to see?
Yeah.
The first thing that comes up is that there was a day, and I don't remember which day it was, like the 12th or 14th. We're famous for counting our days, but it was somewhere in residential, and it was pretty early on, and I realized when I heard someone else say, man, I haven't had a drink in 7 days or something like that. I hadn't either. And I can tell you that at that point, it had been many years since I could say that I'd gone more than a day without it. And so what that person was a mirror of possibility in me, for me, that was available to me. Yeah. And when he reflected me back to myself, I saw I also have not had a drink. Look at that. I didn't think that was possible a week ago.
Yeah, and it is.
And it is. And I can't argue with it because it's empirical data. It's something I'm witnessing right now. And I still had to learn to trust that too. Still working on that one. Yeah.
To trust the reality of your sobriety.
Well, of life in general.
Well, of life in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also that you are a person that is capable of taking on that challenge of walking through hard things and coming out the other side more healed versus utterly and perpetually broken.
Oh, yeah. That's the terrifying prospect is, you might not have much when you come limping into recovery, but what you do have is precious. Yeah. And what you usually have is maybe a busted minivan and whatever you can put inside of it, which was my thing. But you got a lot of really staunch beliefs about yourself, too, that you think are the things that are keeping you up and keeping you moving day to day. Yeah. And you have to dismantle all those. Right? One of those beliefs, I think, and this is one of the things that's so important understand when they are recovering about the relationship that people have with whatever the object of their addiction is, whatever substance, food, people, sex, it doesn't matter. Yeah. People are trying to survive. They're trying to cope. And when the world pains them, and people pain them, whatever the object of their addiction is, doesn't treat them that way. It shows up every time they ask it to, without even asking why. It doesn't judge. It never tells you that you're anything but who you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, because this makes you feel better. You're taking care of yourself, right? This makes you feel better. It's consistent, and you can trust it, and you know it. You know what to expect from it. And if I took those descriptors and put them next to somebody's dating profile, like we'd all like to know and have a friend like that.
Absolutely.
A lot of times, that's the only real friend people have ever had in their life. And when they show up to recover, they're being told that they have to cleave off that meaningful relationship, that attachment, to use our clinical language. And it's meaningful. And it's not something people typically understand.
Yeah. That's a really significant loss.
There's a lot of grief in recovery. Yeah. You wouldn't think.
But especially for people who are self-medicating with substances and then feel like they have no consistency or reliability in their lives. And here's this one thing where that exists finally. And to be able to get better, they have to let go of it. But I also think about for a lot of people, that must be where the value lies in being able to have a 12-step recovery program, to be able to have people who can help make that difference, to be able to be that consistency and reliability, especially when it comes from a group, because then we don't want to just depend on one person
Right.
to provide that for us.
Yeah.
Because then we get into a totally different kind of dependence.
Yep. Absolutely. And it puts incredible burden on the other person too, even if they're willing to bear it.
Yeah.
They often don't understand the nature of it.
Yeah. Well, I keep bringing it back to you because this is your story and you're so good at being able to pass along all of the knowledge that you've gained. And I want to hear the knowledge, but I also want JP. And so how did you go from this broken minivan in an oil field through recovery, out the other side to becoming a therapist? Where did that shift start to happen?
Yeah. So working with other people is a really important part of my recovery.
Okay.
Working for other people who specifically are trying to recover from alcohol and want to try the same thing I tried. And so it's part of the 12-step methodology to give away what you've been given. And through that work, through helping people facilitate their own recovery and watching copies of myself over the years recover. Unfortunately, most people don't recover. I remember when Charlie Sheen had his big public tiger blood meltdown several years. I don't remember how many years ago that was, but man, that was tough. That was tough to watch. And he called 12-step communities into question and said they're a cult and they don't work, and only 1% of people who try it actually recover. And the thing is, he was fairly accurate. What to know about that is that those statistics have to be taken with a massive grain of salt. They are not representative of everyone who tries to recover, and they never could be. It was a TV medical personality, most of whom I don't normally subscribe to, named Dr. Drew.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's like the celebrity whatever thing.
Very familiar with Dr. Drew.
Yeah, well, he said something in response in an interview.
Yeah.
It was not on his show. It was not part of his TV persona or the reality, all that yuck, right? Sorry, Dr. Drew, but that whole genre for me is a yuck. But he really said something meaningful trying to help people understand. And he spoke as a doctor, and I heard him as a doctor in this interview. And he said, Charlie Sheen was right. However, for most of the people who go through and engage in that process for their own purposes and the right way, and here are the two words that mean the right way in my book. That looks terrible. Sorry. You have to be able to do it as thoroughly and honestly as you are capable of doing it at the time. And that's a tall order.
Yeah.
It's a tall order because everything about addicts is dishonest. Everything they tell themselves is dishonest. Everything they tell someone else is dishonest. They have a real difficult relationship with reality and the truth, because the truth is terrifying. Every addict has this sort of imposter syndrome times 20. And to be discovered, to be seen in your natural form, man, it's a huge prospect. It's terrifying. So what Dr. Drew said was that of the people who work it in earnest, the numbers are quite different. And that's true too. And that's, I'll say that empirically, more qualitatively from witnessing people I've worked with over 17 years. Most didn't recover. True enough. Yeah. And if I asked any of my colleagues in the 12-step community, they would probably tell me the same. They would probably also tell me that people that they worked with who were there for their own purposes, not behind a nudge from the judge or family pressure or any of that, for their purposes. And they put themselves into the process authentically. Yeah, recovery happens. And that, I think, is an important place to segue into another area of recovery and this work and where they intersect and how it's changed for me.
Okay.
Through education and working in the field. My view as a recovered person who really is a product of the 12-step community. There's more. There's more here. 12-step recovery was created in the late 1930s. It was the first 12-step book was published 1939. And it wasn't a clinical book. The information that we had about addiction, what it is, how it works, why it works, is still not complete to this day, but we have mountains more research. And I think that it was really tough for me, but I've been able to, as a clinician, not just a 12-stepper, but a 12-stepper who is also a clinician, understand that 12-step is not the only way forward for people.
Yeah.
There is such a thing as harm reduction. And if you go back to myself 10 years ago and say those words, man, we're gonna talk a lot and probably argue.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be really impassioned, probably embroiled at the idea that, and that I think is something that people have to realize too, is that there's more than one avenue to recover. And people can take all the information that they want from as many sources as they want. It's kind of like psychiatric medication. It's an experiment every time, no matter what.
Yeah.
You have to find what works for you. Right?
And I feel like that's where we get to meet people in therapy versus whenever you're operating in a system of support, that we can help that individual understand what is going to work best for them, what they need, and to help move them through the change process to be able to get to a place where they could even engage in a support program, to be able to let them be part of that percent that is helped by it.
Yeah. Sometimes they have to be moved to that place in order to be able to do that. So I think there's more room. There's a wider landscape out there for recovery now. Yeah. We started with the common 12-step recovery programs that everybody's aware of, and now there are alternate versions of it that have come up that, honestly, 12-step is kind of 12-step.
Yeah.
But outside of the 12-step realm, there are other methodologies and methods, really, is the way to, methodology is the right word, because that's what it is. It is a recovery method. We develop our survival styles from trauma, often are not adaptive, right? Which is why we are here, right? And the same thing can hold true in recovery, too. We can find things that are adaptive, even if they're not the widely held belief about what works.
Yeah. It sounds like the further along you got in your own recovery process, and then the further you got in your education, the more you understood just how different recovery can look for people and be successful.
Yeah, and that's the issue right there, is the definition of what success in recovery is. There's not one definition. Yeah. There's not. I believed for many years. And for myself, personally, I still believe that. Yeah. That's my story and my recovery. But in the broader landscape, that's not necessarily true. Yeah.
So, as a therapist, moving from I don't want to work with people in recovery, in part, it sounds like because there's a fear there of then I will not have the time and space and mental capacity to attend to my own recovery. And so, what has that actually been like?
To clarify, it wasn't not to tend to my own recovery, it was tend to my life.
Okay.
Because when we first recover, our life has to be all about recovery. It's foundational. You said it yourself. There was an idea of kind of being stripped down or laid bare, and really it's a deconstruction and a reconstruction. So it wasn't necessarily about not being able to tend to recovery, but about tending to the other parts of my life that aren't recovery. Turns out the reason why we get recovered is to get that back.
To get to
To
have your
have a
life
life
back.
to actually live. Yeah. And I remember very clearly the first time I was working with somebody and they had gotten probably a year or so in and just started to get really unhappy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this doesn't make sense. Like, this is supposed to make you, like, supposed to fix everything. You're doing so great. And you're really this person thorough and honest, right? And they received the benefits of it. They got a lot of benefit and recovery from the work that they were doing. What we determined was all that person was doing 7 days a week when they weren't working was recovery stuff. And I'm like, man, for the first time in my recovery life, I told somebody to go to less meetings. Like, you have to, your life gets bigger. You open up all this space and it starts to be filled with normal life stuff. And you have to tend to that too. And more importantly, you have to understand that you're allowed to.
Oh, that has to be such a scary step.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It is. To do less. Oh yeah. Because once
you've gotten it back.
you have to trust yourself. That's the thing.
Okay.
That's the thing. Like you've turned the bus around, so to speak, through a massive effort. Massive. And everything looks different now. This is real life, like you always saw it from over there in the shadows, and now you have it. And to suggest that I changed again, I mean, that's scary, yeah. But it means trusting yourself. It means that what you're doing is enough, that you're enough, that you're actually sober.
Yeah.
That's such a tough sell for people, is to convince them that they have actually gotten sober, that they're sober.
Yeah. So for you, seeing people start to move from focusing on recovery to focusing on living is a part of what helped you realize, like, oh no, this is where I want my attention to be.
On my life or in the work, you mean?
Both.
Yeah. That actually speaks directly to how I came to be a therapist. It's about a good friend of mine is the first person that I heard use the phrase packing value into the stream of life. Right? And whether or not that's his phrase, I still don't know. I don't think it is. But in my mind, it's always said in his voice.
Yeah.
And I was looking for ways to do that more meaningfully in my work. Recruiting for me was a great career, and it's something that I could do well, but I enjoyed it less the longer I did it.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't fulfilling, and it got to feel a little bit like a curse. And I wanted to do something different. It's natural for people in the recovery community to find their way to healing work. Because there's healing and helping just all over the place in 12-step. And for some people, they kind of trip and fall on it. I won't say I necessarily tripped and fell on it, but I knew a lot of people who did this work and slowly got information over time and gathered interest, and then started educating myself here and there regarding psychology.
Okay.
And really got interested in people more on a clinical level, but didn't have any clinical knowledge. So I wanted to satisfy that, and I wanted to find a way to work more meaningfully in the world as part of my vocation, and it just sort of naturally steered me right here.
So now that you're here, how does it feel working with people who are part of the community that you have been a part of for how long now?
17 years.
17 years. Yeah. How does it feel working with people on the other side?
That's something familiar to me.
Yeah.
Working with them with access to information, clinical information, and experience and tools to use to help is wonderful. But it's not new to me. My capacity to engage with it is new to me.
Okay.
And I think just sort of talking it through here in our discussion, people getting to that moment where they are in recovery, they have cultivated meaningful recovery for themselves in something, and they need to rebalance again and open up. Like, I think having this knowledge base and education and experience is even more helpful as a crossover piece to match with my 12-step experience to help them transition, not out of 12-step, but across 12-step and over also 1 foot in and 1 foot into their normal life as well, because it is such a huge adjustment. Yeah.
Well, what's something that you do to try to strike that balance now?
Really, it's normalization. We feel so Gollum-like, like something else, and that is a skin that just, like, you peel the outer layer off and there's another layer of it underneath. And you just have to keep peeling. And it's really about the belief that you're now something different than you were. And helping them to understand that it's okay for them to understand that they are entitled to as good a life as they could ever hope to have. Not exactly the one that MTV Cribs or whatever, that's not even a thing anymore. I've really dated myself. But, those ideas about what we think we want our life to look like. If nothing was, an object, what would it look like? Rarely does it look like that when people move forward in recovery. Yeah. Most of the time they say it's better than what they could dream up in their limited capacity at the time. But as good as you could hope to have, you're entitled to that. I think everybody is. Yeah. Helping people believe that for themselves is so important because that's the driver. That's the driver for it all. That's where it starts is I believe that I'm good enough to have that. And I believe I'm capable of cultivating it for myself.
Yeah. So how do you cultivate it for yourself? You're great at talking about how other people can get to that place. What about you, JP, both the person and the therapist sitting in front of me?
I have to do the same work that I ask everybody else to do. Yeah. I'm not a fixed alcoholic, and I'm still subject to those beliefs. I'm still subject to imposter syndrome. This is new to me. I haven't been a therapist all that long, right? And sometimes I wonder if I actually know what I'm doing, And there's a lot of doubt that comes up, and it's part of the brain model. Right? It's a fight that we sign up to fight for forever. But we now have a life method that we've adopted. We can adaptively do that. And a lot of times it's actually not about fighting, it's about not fighting. One of the great paradoxes in recovery is to surrender to win. Everybody has the same look on their face when we say it to them the first time.
This is my nosy look, not my confusion look. This is surrender to what? Yeah. I want to know everything. But this is your podcast, not your own therapy session. So we'll make you get into that. What advice do you have for other therapists in recovery, for other new therapists questioning whether they are capable, whether they are good enough to be able to see other people in recovery? What would you say to them?
You are. Yeah, you are. Everybody's niche. I think, I don't want to, maybe I watched too much Lord of the Rings or something recently. It sounds like a Lord of the Rings thing to say, but it's like, it finds you. You don't necessarily find it all the time.
Yeah.
I think if we can do what
The ring find you.
I think it was the wizard staff, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
It's been a minute since I watched Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a new one out now. It's a series. It's Gandalf before Gandalf was Gandalf. He comes from the stars, apparently, and has to find his staff, and it finds him.
I am not caught up on my Lord of the Rings lore.
We should fix that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it finds you.
Yeah. One of the things that we most commonly as therapists tell our clients is to learn to be curious, to help them to be more open-minded and to put down preconceived notions of what it's supposed to be. And I think that holds true here too. It's very much my experience. I'm sure there are a lot of us who know what we want to do and exactly what we want to focus on, and then they go do that and they get the certifications, and then they fill up their private practice and they do that and they're happy. And that wasn't my story. Yeah. And if it's not yours, my advice would be, if it's not yours, leave yourself plenty of space and experiment. Yeah. And don't be afraid to get it wrong. There's so much human chemistry in this work, so much, and it matters. I mean, it is part of the work. Yeah. And if you're not attuned to how the work or the people are affecting you as half of a chemical dyad, like, you have to pay attention to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think much like recovery, young therapists, like new to the field therapists, lean on the protocol. They lean on the system of what you're supposed to do and want to follow that to a T because that feels comfortable and that feels safe. And part of maturing, both in your recovery and maturing as a therapist, is understanding that there's a lot more nuance to that, and that sometimes to live fully, to do therapy well, is breaking the rules and not doing things 1,000% to the T of how you're supposed to do it, because we have to bring our own humanity into it for it to really be impactful. Yeah. If we're doing therapy by checkboxes, then, how are we any different than AI doing therapy?
It's a very safe way to do therapy.
Yeah.
In the right way for a lot of people to do therapy, and the right way for a lot of people to receive therapy. Definitely a place for that. That's one of the reasons why I'm grateful to have been older when I came to this work. And life has packed me full of experiences, like it or not. And, it helps. It matters. I think the idea of professional clinical boundaries is, it's directly what we're orbiting around here. And I think that, that's a really dicey concept. I wish we would spend more time on, or not more time, but more meaningful time on in education and in early clinical practice. We're getting our hours and really cutting our teeth. I think that everybody's boundary structure is outside of rigid and printed ethics that we all subscribe to and follow. Everybody's got to find their own place where they can practice in the best way possible and still maintain the right kind of boundaries. And, it gets hard when we bring so much of ourselves into the work. That's an important piece too, because it has to do with where we position ourselves to be able to do this work in a way that not just helps our clients, but also works for us.
Well, and that's part of the growth process as a therapist. I think we would all love to be able to come out of graduate school fully formed, or even out of clinical supervision fully formed. And the reality is that, the most growth that we have is not within those first 2 years coming out of grad school, but it's within the first 5. Because, we get the basics in graduate school, we start feeling more comfortable in learning and growing in supervision, and then we have that time to live and experience and grow into our skin as a therapist. Yeah. And then beyond that is the challenge of continuing to do that, which is a different struggle for a different day. Oh, yeah. But it's a process that takes time, that you're not going to be there from day one, just like you are not going to be this fully formed person in recovery from day one of sobriety.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes time. And that's the thing. I've never really associated this concept with this work, just with recovery, because it's a recovery concept. So the idea is that, and there's a beautiful metaphor here. It's a little bit pithy, cheesy, if you will, but it really is the best one I've ever heard for this.
Okay.
And it's about recovery not being a finite journey. There is a phrase that comes from one of the 12-step texts that refers to the road of happy destiny.
Okay.
We will see you. Surely we'll see you out there along the road of happy destiny. It's a nice sentiment. What you hear misquoted a lot is the road. We'll see you on the road to happy destiny. Right? But that's not the way. That's not what we're dealing with here. The road is the destination, right? We are here to be travelers. We're here to move our feet and see where we end up. This is my belief. Recovery is not about finishing, right? So the pithy metaphor is that of a dance. When we get on a dance floor with a partner, and the partner in this metaphor can be your recovery, it can be your career, it can be any part of your life, it can be a significant other. Our job is not to get from the place where we start to dance to a finishing point on the dance floor. It is to move with our partner in a way that is fluid. We don't step on their feet, nor are they ours. We sync up, we move attuned to each other, and we move together to the music that's playing at the time. Yeah. And the song changes. And sometimes it's, death metal, and sometimes it's Barry Manilow, and sometimes it's something in between, right? Our job is to be present in the dance, not to finish the dance at the right place, at the right time, at the right moment. And so often I think we have it in our minds that there's somewhere concrete we're supposed to be going. We're supposed to arrive somewhere. And one of the biggest shifts for me is I'm already here. I'm already here. And I have to remember I don't have to travel here. I'm already here. I just have to be here and be a good steward of the here and now.
I think that that's a beautiful metaphor to be able to end on today. I am so grateful that you were able to come on and tell your story, both of recovery and your journey to being a therapist and how you're operating within that right now.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, I love it, and I hope that other people are able to listen and hear some of their own story in yours, and to be able to heed your advice, but mostly just to feel a sense of connection. And that's what this podcast is here for, what it's all about, for us to feel a connection with other therapists and to feel less lonely in this work that is primarily about other people, that our stories deserve to be heard too. Yeah. So for everybody listening, we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. We will have yet another therapist on the podcast, and we will keep telling these stories.
Thanks, Kimberly.